welcome to this week's edition of the Holland Land Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy, I'm the director of the museum, and this week's subject is going to be one of, you would call the founders of West New York, Mr. Robert Morris. Now Robert Morris, you may have heard of from the American Revolution. He was a prominent figure in the Continental Congress, but his story actually begins back in England. He was born in Liverpool, England, and was eventually sent to Philadelphia, where he became well entrenched in the mercantile business out of that busy American port. It was in Philadelphia that he began to make his fortune in creating a vast trading empire that reached around the world, stretching to India, the Caribbean, East Asia, as well as all over Europe. And this trading complex made him a very wealthy man and made him very well aware of world events that were soon to engulf the colonies. With the passing of the Stamp Act and the Tea Act and the other so-called intolerable acts that Great Britain levied against the North American colonies, Robert Morris was smack dab in the middle of all of it. He saw these acts as reprehensible and as a classic example of taxation without representation. However, when the fumes of revolution began to rise and people began to get up this rebellious fervor, Morris was not one of those to join the cause very early on. In fact, he remained a loyalist at the early portion of what is known as the Revolutionary period. And for this reason, he was seen in a different light. However, the reason behind it was in order to maintain free trade with England, which was heavy portion of his business and his fortune. Once the Declaration of Independence was brought forth, Morris soon started to shift his viewpoints. Though he voted against independence at the first vote in the Continental Congress, he abstained from the second vote, which allowed the unanimous decision to rebel against Great Britain to pass. But once the move for independence got going, Morris was soon a large supporter of it. He would actually said that he would not base his decision solely on his own, but what was best for the people, and though he could not lead, he'd be willing to support those that could. However, it is without Morris's support, the American Revolution does not exist. He used his fortune to essentially fund the Continental Army and much of the expenses that were incurred by the Continental Congress. He was responsible for paying many of the wages of the soldiers, as well as paying for ammunition and other supplies. So you could say his money was what really won the Revolutionary War, for without it, it doesn't come to be. Now, after the revolution was a success, Morris is brought back into the national spotlight as he becomes a member of the Constitutional Congress, where he is one of the signers of the U.S. Constitution. He's one of very few members who actually signed both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. So he is at the forefront of two of the most seminal documents and the basis for the United States government. Following the success of the Revolutionary War, Morris is actually is voted as the Superintendent of Finance by the U.S. Congress, and then is actually asked by President George Washington to be the first Secretary of the Treasury. However, he feels he does not fit the role well and actually refuses and offers up a secondary suggestion to Washington, his friend Alexander Hamilton. Now, Morris suggests Hamilton because Hamilton was maybe more of a go-getter, but also had many of the same feelings as Morris did when it came to finance, particularly in designing a national bank. Washington, as we know, would go with Morris's suggestion and offer it to Alexander Hamilton, who took the position and became the first Secretary of the Treasury. While being out of the main spotlight in politics, Morris continued his financial ventures. The main one becoming land speculation, which was a major practice of the wealthy elite of the new United States. And Morris sought out large tracts of land throughout many states in the eastern portion of the United States to make his fortune even larger. And one of those areas that he found is Western New York today. And his transaction for this land actually goes with the Phelps-Gorham Company. Now, Phelps and Gorham were two investors from Massachusetts who actually purchased all the land from essentially Seneca Lake to Lake Erie from the state of Massachusetts in order to settle it. However, they defaulted on their loans and were only able to really settle the eastern portion, basically up to Rochester, leaving everything west of the Genesee River open. Morris came to them and was willing to take it off their hands. And he did so about 1791. However, he was not interested in really doing anything with the land other than flipping it and making his profit. So to do that, he needed to find a buyer. And the buyer that he found was the Holland Land Company. He was approached by Theophilus Casanova, who was the first general agent of the land company, and a deal was struck. It took several years to work out the agreement for what was to become 3.25 million acres worth of land. And by 1797, finally, with the Treaty of Big Tree between the Senecas and the Holland Land Company, the purchase was finally ratified. Morris's life after that takes a steady downturn. He loses much of his fortune and is actually forced into a debtor's prison around 1800. And it's actually due to this that tax laws are changed in the United States in order to let him out of prison because of his service to the fledgling country. Otherwise, he probably would have died in the debtor's prison. Now, Robert Morris is synonymous with this area. However, he never actually stepped foot here and never saw what he bought. He basically took it on speculation. Now, when the Treaty of Big Tree is signed, he actually sends his son, Thomas Morris, up to represent him, and his son actually stays in the area and settles along the Genesee Valley. And many local areas actually get named after him. In particular, Mount Morris, the town in Livingston County, is named after the Morris family. But Morris's name still lived on and is still seen as one of the prominent figures of the Holland Land Office and the Holland Purchase and the Holland Land Office Museum. When the museum opens in 1894, the dedication is actually given in the name of Robert Morris. He was seen as the progenitor of this endeavor. And later on, the Batavia City School District names an elementary school after him, which has since closed, but a lot of children in Batavia went through Robert Morris School. So every day they would see Robert Morris's name as they walked in, and he became a figure to really study. He's a truly remarkable man that I think gets overlooked in the Revolutionary period, but his roots to local history cannot be denied. And just to point out, we do have a major artifact of Robert Morris's here in the museum. I am standing next to his actual desk that came from his home in Philadelphia. Now, this is called a Butlers Desk, which is called that because of the folding down drawer cover that opens up to the desk. Now, this came from his home in Philadelphia, where Morris lived essentially his entire life. And it was at his home, which has since been demolished, but if you've ever been to Philadelphia and you get to go see the Liberty Bell, you're actually standing on the spot where Robert Morris's home once stood. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit of information about Robert Morris, and we hope everybody comes down and visits the museum now that we're back up and running, and you can see all the wonderful things firsthand.